On my 75th birthday, my son screamed, "Everyone is sick of you, get out." His wife threw my homemade cake in the trash. But what I did next made everyone gasp. And the very next morning, their perfect life came crashing down. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Maee's Stories, where real-life drama meets life-changing lessons. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. If you're new here, welcome to our family. And if you're returning, thank you for your loyalty. Before we dive into today's incredible story, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Also, I absolutely love connecting with you. Drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. It truly warms my heart to see how far these stories travel. Now, grab your tea, get comfortable, and let's begin. Today, I turned 75 years old. The number felt significant, substantial, like standing before an ancient oak tree. When I looked in the mirror that morning, time stared back at me through the wrinkles around my eyes and the silver streaking my temples. Was I frightened? No. It was more a quiet sense of wonder. Is this really me? Has all of this truly happened? My modest two-bedroom apartment smelled of brown sugar and warm spices. I'd been working in the kitchen since dawn, baking my signature sweet potato pound cake, the same recipe my mother passed down to me decades ago. I baked this cake when I married my husband, Jabari. I baked it for Kian's first birthday, for every birthday after, and when he left for boot camp. That warm, sweet aroma had permeated my entire life. To me, it smelled like home. Like love itself. I ran my hand across the old kitchen table where I rolled out the cake layers. Its smooth surface, marked with fine scratches, held memories. Jabari, young and strong, fixing a broken iron, little Kian building towers from wooden blocks. Today, the table held only flour and a rolling pin, and my hands weren't as nimble as they once were. The dough was soft and alive under my fingers as I rolled it into thin circles. Disconnected thoughts drifted through my mind. Kian had called yesterday. "Mom, I need you to bail me out. It's urgent. The car needs a critical repair." His voice carried such worry. How could I refuse? I withdrew nearly my entire Social Security check money I'd saved for emergencies and gave it to him. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best," he'd said, rushing out the door. I sighed then, not from frustration, but from that particular maternal obligation, like a debt you carry as long as you live. You help your children, even when they're nearly 50 and you're left with a few crumpled $20 bills until the next check arrives. It's fine, I told myself. I'm used to living frugally. I can manage on rice and beans. The important thing is that they're okay. One by one, the pound cake layers went into the oven, and the apartment filled with comfort. I glanced at the photograph on the wall. Jabari and me, young and hopeful, standing beside the lake house we were building together. He'd done almost all the work himself, dreaming that we'd live there in retirement, plant roses, and raise our grandchildren. He never made it. He passed away too soon, leaving me to raise 15-year-old Kian alone. I was a senior design engineer then, with projects, business trips, and dreams of traveling. I'd wanted to take a Great Lakes cruise, see Mackinac Island. But I had to abandon it all. I needed to raise my son. I clung to that responsibility like a life raft. My entire existence, all my strength, all my unfulfilled dreams poured into him. Into my boy. And now that boy was almost 50, and I was still baking him sweet potato pound cake. We decided to celebrate my birthday at the lake house. Of course, the lake house. According to my daughter-in-law, Serafina, my apartment was too cramped and outdated, like a storage unit. She'd said this without flinching when I suggested hosting there, her eyes looking past me as she spoke. Kian just shrugged. "Well, Mom, Serafina's right. The lake house has more space and fresh air." I didn't argue. The lake house was mine, the only thing remaining from Jabari, from our life together. But I rarely visited anymore. Serafina and Kian had been living there for about 15 years since they married. They'd renovated everything, furnished it in their modern style. Nothing of Jabari's remained. They'd even cut down the old maple trees we'd planted together. They just make shade and mess, Serafina had said dismissively. In their place stood a perfectly manicured lawn and an expensive fire pit. I visited my own house like a guest. Guests began arriving around 3 p.m. I'd brought bags of groceries by taxi that morning, preparing appetizers, salads, and pinwheel sandwiches. Serafina greeted everyone on the porch, radiant in a beautiful dress. She kissed my cheek briefly. She smelled of expensive perfume and faint irritation. Mrs. Okoro, why don't you head to the kitchen? You need to finish the cheese board and make sure the hot dishes don't get cold. And so I went. My birthday transformed into another day of servitude. I stood in the kitchen, which I barely recognized, with its gleaming tiles and stainless steel, slicing cheese and meat, arranging platters. Laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the living room. My name was mentioned only once, when someone called out, "Where's the birthday girl?" Serafina answered brightly, "Oh, she's our little helper, busy in the kitchen." Everyone laughed. I brought out platters, placed them on the table, and immediately cleared the dirty ones. No one offered me a seat. I was just part of the decor, silent and functional. At one point, I sat on the edge of a chair, slightly apart from everyone. The conversation turned to the lake house. One of Jabari's old friends, Elias Dubois, reminisced warmly. "I remember, Imani, when Jabari and I planted that tall pine right there. Look how massive it's grown." I smiled, wanting to join that warm moment of memory. "Yes. And we buried a treasure underneath it," I began. "Kian was just a baby. We wrapped it in a handkerchief." "Oh, Dad, please, not the old stories again," Serafina interrupted, turning to her own father. "Kian and I are thinking of flying to Turks and Caicos next year. The beaches there are incredible, the service is top-notch. Not like these old pines and mosquitoes." The conversation instantly shifted to Turks and Caicos, all-inclusive resorts, and airfare. My buried treasure, a piece of broken glass, 3 marbles, and a rusty quarter, was left forgotten in the ground. Something cold and heavy sank in my chest. I stood quietly and walked back to the kitchen. I'd rather wash dishes than sit there, invisible at my own birthday table. And then came the climax. Time for the cake. My sweet potato pound cake. I'd spent half the day on it. The layers were soaked in cream cheese frosting, tender and melting. I'd topped it with shaved chocolate and pecans, carefully piping the number 75. I carried it out on the large round platter we'd received for our 25th anniversary. I carried it with one last desperate hope. Here it is, my symbol of love, my greatest gift. Maybe now. I placed the cake in the center of the table. It looked authentically homemade, genuinely crafted with love. "Oh, Imani, seriously, why would you do that?" Serafina's voice rang across the living room, dripping with contempt. "We already have a proper store-bought cake from a fancy bakery. No one is going to eat this sad little homemade thing." An awkward silence descended. I felt like I'd stopped breathing. But then Elias Dubois, my husband's dear friend, tried to salvage the moment. "Now, Serafina, Imani's pound cake, that's the taste of childhood. That's real tradition. I'll definitely have a slice." "Give me 2." That was the final straw. The word tradition, spoken in front of her wealthy, trendy friends, sounded like an insult to Serafina. It shattered the image of the modern, successful hostess she'd so carefully constructed. Her face twisted. Cold fury flashed in her eyes. With a quick, practiced movement, she grabbed my platter. "Tradition belongs in a museum," she hissed through clenched teeth. And in front of all the stunned guests, she flipped the platter over, dumping my pound cake, my effort, my love, directly into the trash can by the wall. "We're celebrating the future." A deafening, absolute silence hung in the room. The only sound was the dull, wet thump as the cake settled at the bottom of the trash. Everyone stared from the trash can to me. I stood there, frozen, and looked at my son. I waited, hoping he would stand up, say something, stop this nightmare. Kian stood up. His face was scarlet, distorted. He looked at the horror in his guest's eyes, at his wife's triumphant expression, and he found his scapegoat the most defenseless one. He turned to me, pointing a trembling finger, and yelled so loudly my ears rang, "Look what you did. You've embarrassed us. Everyone is sick of you. You can't behave normally. Get out of here. Get out, I'm telling you. Everyone is tired of you." In that moment, something inside me didn't break. No, it snapped. Like a thin, overtaut wire that had been vibrating with tension for 50 years. It didn't snap with a loud sound. It simply ceased to exist. The ringing in my ears didn't fade. It focused into a single, pure, high note. A deep, unsettling stillness descended. It was as if the part of me that had spent its entire life hoping, excusing, forgiving, and waiting for love had been surgically removed without anesthetic, with one precise motion. I looked at my son's face, contorted by his scream, and I realized this is no longer my cake. This is no longer my lake house. And this is no longer my problem. I nodded once, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Agreed. I turned around, not looking back at my son's crimson face or the guest's frozen expressions. I took a step, then another. My legs moved automatically, as if following a long-established but forgotten path. Behind me hung a vacuum of silence. I reached the foyer and took my old trench coat from the hook. The fingers that had trembled half an hour ago while tying my apron now moved with confident precision, buttoning the coat. 1, 2, 3. Everything in place. I wrapped my scarf around my neck, took my purse. Inside were an empty wallet, keys to my city apartment, and a handkerchief. That was enough. I didn't turn around. I didn't say a word. I simply opened the front door, stepped into the cool evening air, and quietly closed the door behind me. The click of the lock sounded like a period placed at the end of a very long, very exhausting sentence. I walked toward the bus stop, barely aware of my surroundings. Streetlights illuminated a lilac bush here, a sagging fence there. The world existed somewhere separate from me. Inside, there was only that high, pure note canceling out all feelings. No pain. No hurt. No anger. Only deafening clarity. A battered old city bus arrived. I sat by the window on the cold vinyl seat. Outside, the lights of strangers' houses and silhouettes of trees drifted past. And in my head, like an accountant closing year-end books, facts were methodically and dispassionately sorted. Not grievances. Just facts. Fact number 1, my Maee gold pendant, a gift from Jabari for my 30th birthday. Heavy, honeycombed gold. I'd cherished it. About 5 years ago, it went missing. I searched the entire apartment, fretted, even cried secretly. 6 months later, I saw it on Serafina's neck in a vacation photo, sparkling in the sun. When I stammered a question, she casually replied, "Oh, I found this at an antique shop." Can you believe it? Almost identical. I knew she was lying. But I kept silent. Fact number 2, the money. How many times had I given them my savings? For the car down payment. For emergency roof repairs. For premium tutoring for my granddaughter before college. I lived on yogurt and bread so they could vacation in Turks and Caicos to help the kids distress. They never once invited me along. I was useful as an ATM, but not as family. I'd look at their photos tanned and happy against azure seas and tell myself, the main thing is that they're all right. Fact number 3, the gradual erasure of me from their lives and from my own house. First, my pictures moved from the living room to the hallway by the guest bathroom. Then my favorite mug, the one I drank tea from when visiting, was accidentally broken. Then Kian stopped calling me Mom, switching to the formal Mrs. Okoro, especially in front of Serafina's friends. It was like slowly erasing an old inscription to write a new, shinier one in its place. The bus jolted over potholes. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass, a tired, elderly woman in a simple coat. Trailing behind this woman was a long train of swallowed words, erased hurts, and one-sided love. A one-way street. And tonight, I'd reached the end. The gate had dropped. He said, "Get out." A son's wish is law. I would grant his wish literally. That night, I slept better than I had since my youth, without dreams, without anxious thoughts, without the familiar lump in my throat. It was as if an impossible burden, one I'd carried so long I considered it part of myself, had been lifted from my shoulders. I woke to bright morning sun streaming through the window. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel stale with loneliness. It was light. It was full of freedom. I got up, washed my face, brewed coffee. My movements were unhurried but filled with new, unfamiliar purpose. I didn't make a plan. I simply knew what needed to be done. From the old wardrobe, I retrieved a cardboard folder tied with string containing all our important documents. The marriage certificate. Jabari's death certificate. And at the very bottom, a thick official document, the deed of title. I ran my finger over the typewritten line, subject of right, Imani Sadia Okoro. Type of right, sole ownership. The sole owner. I looked at the seal in the corner, and suddenly it reminded me of blueprints from my past life. A memory surfaced, so vivid it felt like yesterday. I was 35. Jabari had been gone almost a year. Kian, a difficult teenager, had gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd. Then I was called to the company's main office in Atlanta. They offered me the head position of the experimental design studio at a major aerospace firm, my own lab, a corporate apartment, completely different prospects. It was a peak I'd never dared to dream of. I sat in that high-ceilinged office, holding the appointment letter, but I didn't see new machinery. I saw my son's bewildered face. I thought about how he'd be left alone in our apartment, how I'd be torn between two cities, how the lake house we'd just finished would be overgrown with weeds. And I refused. I said, "Thank you, but I can't. I have a son." I returned home and poured all of myself, all my unrealized engineering talent, into maintaining that house, that semblance of stability for him. I sacrificed my career for that lake house. The same lake house I was kicked out of last night. I placed the document on the table. The memory didn't cause pain. It was the final missing piece of the mosaic, the last argument for my internal judge. My hand confidently picked up the phone. First, I dialed the real estate agency I'd seen advertised. A cheerful man answered. "Good morning, Guarantee Realty. How can I help you?" "Hello," I said, my voice even infirm. I surprised myself. "My name is Imani Sadia Okoro. I would like to list a lake house and property for urgent sale. The property on Maplewood Drive in the Lakeview Shores development." "Got it, Mrs. Okoro. When would be convenient for our specialist to come for inspection and appraisal?" "Anytime." "Today," I replied. "The key to the gate is under the large stone to the left of the entrance. All documents are in order, right here in my hands. Please act as quickly as possible." "Understood. We'll get right on it." I hung up without a trace of doubt. Then I dialed another number, my only real friend, Desta. We'd sat at the same desk in college. She was the only one who had always seen through my family. "Imani?" Her familiar, slightly raspy voice answered. "Happy birthday, dear. I called yesterday and couldn't reach you. How was the party?" I listened silently to her cheerful greeting, then quietly, without emotion, told her in a few sentences about the cake, the trash can, and Kian's scream. Silence hung on the other end. Then Desta exhaled. Finally, she said, her voice mixing relief and warmth. Finally, Imani. I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. They mistook your patience for a doormat. So what are you going to do? Her question was direct, without unnecessary sentiment. She knew the issue wasn't the cake. The agent is listing the lake house for sale this afternoon, I replied calmly. Desta chuckled approvingly. Good. Very good. Now listen closely. They'll start calling soon, screaming, crying, trying to play on your guilt. Don't answer. Under no circumstances. Let that for sale sign speak for you. It will be more eloquent than any words. Okay, Desta. Hang in there, friend. You're doing the right thing. I hung up. There was silence in my soul, not the dead silence of last night's vacuum, but the quiet, clear stillness of an autumn morning. It was settled. There was no turning back. A few days passed, days of a quiet I hadn't known in years. The telephone on my dresser remained silent, and that silence spoke volumes. I knew what they were thinking. They were waiting for me to cool off, as usual. To bake some biscuits, come with a contrite expression, and apologize for daring to upset them with my existence. They were waiting for me to call and say, Kian, son, forgive your silly old mother. This pattern had worked flawlessly for decades. But the mechanism was broken. I wasn't waiting. I was living. I got up each morning and did the exercises I'd abandoned 20 years ago. I went to the store and bought myself not the cheapest cottage cheese but the one I actually liked. I took my old knitting needles and yarn from the closet and started knitting a simple, unadorned scarf. Row after row, stitch after stitch. The rhythmic clicking of needles was soothing. This was creation. I was creating something simple, warm, and entirely for myself. Outwardly, nothing in my life had changed. But inside, everything had. I stopped being a function, an appendage to their well-being. I was Imani Sadia Okoro again, not just a mother and mother-in-law, but an independent person. I knew this was the calm before the storm. I didn't see it, but I could clearly picture the realtor's car pulling up to the lake house. I could see the serious man in a suit taking a hammer and a large, bright sign from his trunk, walking across Serafina's perfect lawn, choosing a spot, and with a few precise hammer blows, driving the post with the words for sale into the earth that belonged to Jabari and me. That sign was my reply. My statement. My farewell. On the third afternoon, the phone exploded. It rang frantically, demandingly, choking on its own shriek. I sat in my armchair and knitted. I watched the machine, which seemed about to jump off the dresser. Kian called. Then Serafina. Then Kian again. I didn't answer. I had nothing to say to them. Everything I wanted to say was written on that sign by the gate. They weren't calling to apologize. They were calling to demand an explanation, to put everything back in its place. But the old places no longer existed. By evening, they arrived. I knew they would. I heard the car pull into the driveway, doors slamming. I didn't get up. I continued knitting row after row, stitch after stitch. I didn't hear a knock. I heard a sharp, unpleasant sound in the keyhole. They didn't even knock. They walked into my house with their own key, like owners. That was the final touch, definitively confirming the rightness of my decision. The door flew open. They stood on the threshold. Serafina had red splotches on her face and neck, her eyes shooting daggers. Kian was pale, bewildered, his lips trembling. They saw me sitting calmly with my knitting, and for a moment, they froze. They probably expected to find me in tears, hysterical, but certainly not this picture of domestic peace. Serafina recovered first. She stormed into the room like a fury. "Have you lost your mind?" Her voice was shrill. "What is this? What kind of circus are you pulling? You've decided to ruin us? To throw your own son, your grandchildren, out into the street?" I was silent. I just lifted my eyes and looked not at her face contorted with malice, but right through her. I didn't see rage. I saw primal fear. The fear of losing the beautiful picture she'd so carefully painted at my expense. Kian joined in, choosing a different tactic, the soft, manipulative one that had always worked. He came closer, looking into my eyes. "Mom, what happened? Why are you doing this? Are you punishing us for the cake?" "Mom, I'm sorry." Serafina got carried away. "But this is our home. Our shared home. The home of our children. Where will we go?" The word "our" sounded especially hollow in the silent room. Our home, where I was relegated to the role of cook. Where I was a source of shame. Where my effort and love were tossed in the trash. I let them talk themselves out. I allowed their shouts and pleas to hang in the air and die. I looked at my son, at his desperate face, and for the first time, I felt no pang of pity. Maternal love, it seemed, had drained out of me to the very last drop that night at my birthday. Only cold, crystalline clarity remained. When they fell silent, exhausted, I placed my knitting on the side table neatly, without dropping a single stitch. Only then did I answer. My voice was quiet, but in the ringing silence of the apartment, it sounded like the blow of a hammer. "This is not your home." They both flinched. "This is my property," I continued just as evenly, looking Kian straight in the eye. "A house you've lived in for free for 15 years. I never asked you for rent. I never asked for money for taxes. I only ever gave. But I'm your son. You're my mother." Kian stammered. This was his last trump card, thrown onto the table. I inclined my head slightly. My gaze, I knew, was unfamiliar to him. It contained none of the maternal warmth he was accustomed to. "The mother everyone is sick of," I said, quoting his own words, "the mother who embarrasses you. The mother who should get out. Remember, Kian, you asked me to leave." He recoiled as if I'd struck him. "And I am finally granting your request," I said, and my voice, perhaps for the first time in my life, acquired the hardness of steel. "I am leaving completely. You see, my old-fashioned cake, my old lake house, my savings, all of these are parts of me. They're all connected to me. And since you don't need me, you won't get any of it." They stared at me like I was a ghost. They couldn't believe these words were coming from their quiet, compliant, always available mother and mother-in-law. Serafina opened her mouth to shout something, but no words came out. Kian just stood there, silently gulping air. I stood up from the armchair. "The decision has been made. The agent has all the instructions. He's already looking for buyers. You'll need to provide access for showings. You have 30 days to find yourselves a new place to live and move your things out." I said this and knew I had nothing more to add. Everything had been said. I walked past them to the window and looked out into the yard at the old bench where I'd once sat with Jabari. I didn't look at them, but I felt their world crumbling, a world built on someone else's foundation. My real world was just beginning to be built. They left, leaving behind a heavy residue of confusion and anger in the air of my apartment. I felt nothing but silence. I walked over to the phone and pulled the cord from the wall. No more calls. No more screaming. No more accusations. Everything that needed to be said, I had said. Everything that needed to be done, I had done. The following weeks were strange. The echoes of their crumbling world reached me like distant sounds. A couple of times, Serafina's frightened mother called, incoherently begging me to reconsider, to have mercy on the children. I politely replied that I'd had mercy on them all my life, and now it was time for them to take care of themselves. After the second call, I stopped answering her, too. One day, Desta called. Her voice was sympathetic but without judgment. "I saw Serafina at the county health clinic yesterday," she said. "She doesn't exactly look like the Queen of Turks and Caicos anymore. She's aged 10 years. They say they moved out and found some rundown 2-bedroom rental across the county line. Kian took a second job stocking shelves at night, and she's running around to interviews. But after 15 years of being a house manager, no one's really hiring her. They're fighting terribly, apparently." The lake house sold surprisingly fast. Buyers were found almost immediately, a young family who, according to the realtor, fell in love with the place at first sight. On the day of closing, I sat in the agency's office, signing papers. My hand didn't tremble. When the sum of money with so many zeros I couldn't have imagined was deposited into my savings account, I felt no euphoria. I felt weight. A pleasant, substantial weight of possibilities. This wasn't just money. These were the years of my grounded life. This was my unrealized career. These were all the dresses I hadn't bought and all the retreats I hadn't taken. It all came back to me in the form of a bank transfer. The first thing I did was sign up for a high-end hearing center. I'd been hearing poorly in one ear for years, but I'd always dismissed it as too expensive or something that could wait. They fitted me with a small, almost invisible digital hearing aid. When I stepped outside and turned it on for the first time, I froze. I heard the crunch of leaves underfoot, the chirp of a sparrow high above, the faint hum of power lines overhead. The world crashed down on me in an avalanche of sounds I'd long forgotten. And I cried for the first time through this whole ordeal. But these were tears not of sorrow, but of rediscovery. Then I bought a coat. All my life, I'd worn something practical, stain-resistant, gray or black. But then I saw this one in a store window, a trench coat of deep, saturated royal blue, the color of the Mississippi River at dusk. It was completely impractical but incredibly beautiful. I went in and tried it on. It fit me perfectly. And I bought it without a second thought. When I walked out onto the street in that new blue coat, I felt like someone else, not an old lady seeing out her days, but a woman. Just a woman. And then I fulfilled my oldest, most cherished dream, the one Jabari and I had held on to. I booked a 10-day Great Lakes cruise from Chicago to Mackinac Island. I remembered how we'd saved for that trip, and then all the money went to Kian's college tutors. "It's okay, Imani," Jabari had said. "Our son is more important. We'll still get there." We didn't get there. But I would. Before leaving, I did one more thing. I found a community college online and signed up for an introductory course in textile design. I suddenly, desperately wanted to return to where I'd started, to take fabric and dyes in my hands, to feel a pattern being born under my fingers again, to feel harmony emerge from the chaos of color. And so here I am. I'm standing on the deck of a pristine white ship. The cool river wind ruffles my new scarf, and I pull my blue coat tight around me. Green shores, golden church domes, and small towns drift slowly past. The ship glides smoothly, cutting through the water, leaving a long, foamy wake behind the stern. In my hands, I hold a sketchbook. I open it to a clean page. Colored pencils lie beside me. I look at the ripples on the water, at the play of light and shadow, and my hand begins to trace a pattern on its own smooth, intertwining lines like waves. I feel neither anger nor bitterness. I hold no resentment toward the past and no fear of the future. There is only this moment. This blue sky. This vastness. This quiet, profound sense of peace as deep as the lake itself. For 75 years, my world was the size of my small apartment and the lake house kitchen. I gave away my life, my money, and my heart. They took it all and threw it on the floor like that cake. But on those ruins, I didn't try to restore the old life. I simply walked away and began to build a new one. And it is all mine. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. Imani's story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to reclaim your life, to set boundaries, and to choose yourself. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up and leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you or your loved ones ever faced similar disrespect? How did you handle it? Your stories matter, and I read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe to Maee's Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next powerful story. Remember, beautiful souls, you are worthy of respect, love, and dignity. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye for now.